To discuss the Lorraine Cross Award for Prize-Based Medical Innovation, we have with us Micah Aberson and Dr. David Pierce of Sanford Health, and Dr. Catherine Hyde, the 2018 award recipient, joining this year's winner.
A thread through history, telling of the past, while carrying a legacy of hope and faith in a new and better tomorrow. The Lorraine Cross, a symbol deeply rooted, tied to those refusing to back down in the face of adversity, willing to fight for what they believed. From upon the banners of French Crusade forces to atop hospitals across America, this powerful figure has stood strong for centuries, both calling out to those in need of sanctuary and rallying those determined to make a difference, no matter the odds or the status quo that define the times. Sanford Health is honored to write another page in the storied legacy of the Lorraine Cross. The Sanford Lorraine Cross Award brings to light the medical crusaders of today, who are following in the footsteps of those who came before. The rule breakers, nonconformists, mavericks, and innovators. Those whose passion for transformative change could not be contained.
At Sanford Health, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is surrounding ourselves with other people that have done tremendous things and made significant contributions to humanity, to their clinical or research practice. And the Sanford Lorraine Cross Award aligns so well to that. As an integrated healthcare delivery company, we've got a tremendous research operation and clinicians that are spending their days, day in and day out, focused on trying to eradicate a disease state, trying to bring cures as quickly as they can from bench to bedside. And so our ability to sort of go out and find like-minded people across the globe that have done remarkable things, introduce them to our researchers and to our clinicians, just adds so much value to what we're trying to do.
The award was really about, we want to reward other people that have the same philosophy as us. Our philosophy in research is to impact our patients, to make a difference, to cross the finish line with something that's really going to treat a malady or a disease and improve the health of an individual that needs it. It's unique that an organization would actually reward an individual or individuals outside its own organization. But the true uniqueness is that, this is about rewarding people that are still active in their careers, are deserving of the accolade and recognition that they have finished something now. The Sanford Lorraine Cross Award is about running an algorithm that evaluates over the past 10 years all of the discoveries, all of the publications and approvals and clinical trials that are in the public domain that have impacted medicine and research and science. That algorithm collates the frequency of all of these things, which says, okay, these are the major advances that we've had. We take that list and we take a look at that and then say, okay, these are the areas. We're not looking at individuals. We're looking at the areas that have most impacted medicine and humankind, really, when you think about it. And then we have a group of scientists and physicians. These individuals cross the whole gamut of medicine, research, and science. So then they can really agnostically assess what was the most impactful findings in the last few years. At that point in time, then it's on us to do our due diligence to say these are the 3 areas with the most advances, to go out and find the individuals that made those discoveries, made the major contribution to actually crossing the finish line and making that impact. And then they come and present to our international board. And that's a real interesting scenario because they're all winners in my mind. It's quite moving because most scientists, we're driven by something that happened in our personal lives, quite honestly. Sanford recognized that what was discovered by these individuals, what was pushed forward by these individuals, will go on and be recognized by others.
Well, it was a wonderful recognition of the work that we had done. In the year prior to the award, we had won approval from the FDA of the drug that we'd worked on together for a rare form of congenital blindness. And it was important because it was the first approval of this kind of gene therapy for an inherited disease. And since then, Novartis, which partnered on the program for the rest of the world, has achieved approvals in many other parts of the world. So of course, that sort of thing is its own reward, but it is nice to be recognized, especially among the other distinguished nominees. This year's event was special to me. First of all, of course, it brought back all the excitement of December 2018. I was pleased to learn when I heard the names of the nominees that 2 of them were people that I knew fairly well. And actually, I was assigned to sit at the table with Dr. Carl June.
The winner of the $1 million Sanford Lorraine Cross Award, Dr. Carl June.
I'm still waking up to the new reality. It was an amazing event. It was like a dream. I'm thinking, long term, how good this is for science. It's just an unbelievable day for us, and I think a new era for society in general. Over this last year, the public's learned the value of the immune system in a way they never knew. The immune system can be used to treat cancer. 10 million people die every year from cancer. And now, there's hope now.
She was born on May 2nd, 2005, and she had a full head of black hair and weighed 10 pounds. And she was perfectly healthy up until just after her 5th birthday. Emily was diagnosed in May 2010, and she had relapsed twice and came to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And she came at a time when we were just opening up the clinical trial in acute lymphoid leukemia, so it was really just in time in her case, and she received some chemotherapy to hold her while we were manufacturing her T cells. I'll never forget that image of Emily sitting on the bed, bald, being infused with the cells, her parents looking on and wondering what the future would hold. I picked her up on day 1 when she was diagnosed, and I said, Emily, only the strongest children are picked to fight cancer, and you're going to be a hero because you're going to beat it no matter what.
You know, it was one of these miraculous cases where she had a very severe side effect from the therapy called cytokine release syndrome, with fevers high enough that it made her unconscious. She was comatose. She had 106-degree fever for about 3 days.
We found out later that over 3.5 pounds of her body weight was cancer, and each one of those modified T cells can kill up to 1,000 cancer cells. So they went in there and started killing our cancer, and her body became overwhelmed, and she ended up in a coma and on a ventilator for 14 days. The doctors at the pediatric intensive care unit that night told us there was a 1 in 1,000 chance she'd survive the night. So I said, well, I'll see you at rounds tomorrow because she's going to beat her cancer. She woke up from that coma after they gave her the tocilizumab on her 7th birthday. So she came back to us and opened her eyes, and the staff sung happy birthday to her, and we took her home on June 1st of 2012. Now she's 8 years since she spent a night in the hospital. She's been cancer-free ever since.
I've never seen anyone that sick recover. So to go into remission within just 10 to 12 days after therapy was really astonishing. And that's how rapid CAR T cells can work. We were able to show that she had had pounds, literally pounds of cancer in her bone marrow, in her spleen, and other organs, and it all went away.
What we've seen just over the past 12 months has put such a spotlight on how important research is, how important the advancement of cures is.
There's nothing quite as thrilling as discovering something in the lab. And when you find something and you're able to confirm a finding, maybe you do the experiment once, maybe you do it twice, maybe you do it 3 times. There's nothing quite like the feeling that you've discovered something that no one else in the world knows.
Science, you know, takes years. People also have to get used to failure. That's the only way you get better. And, you know, I always use the analogy of baseball where you're an all-star, and in the Hall of Fame, if you can get a base hit 1 out of 3 times, meaning 2 out of 3 times you fail. So in science, sometimes it's 1 out of 10, 1 out of 100. To take that path required a lot of persistence. Well, we have, fortunately, a really wide road that's paved ahead of us now because there's all kinds of tools that have come together, you know, this idea of synthetic immune systems, you know, which was a pipe dream for me for 30 years. You know, the people on my teams have each done things that, I mean, they all have now learned things that are invaluable now to making these new therapies possible. You know, I think, you know, my legacy will be hopefully, you know, that I was kind and, you know, worked hard and was lucky to be rewarded in my life. And that is more than anyone can ever expect. And there's so many people that have done great things and they didn't live long enough to see them happen. And in my case, I was able to witness it, and you know, so that I've been blessed beyond belief, and I'm really thankful for that. But this whole last year has taught a lot of us, you know, about how short life can be and unexpected, and I've just been blessed. Every day I have now is a gift.
Innovation is usually something that takes time to be recognized because it creates change. So for us to recognize innovation before anybody else, that recognizes that, you know, Sanford is leading the way.
When research wins, we all win. Think about that against every single one of these disease states, and whether it's Batten's disease and the work that Dr. Pierce is doing, or people that are fighting type 1 diabetes. I mean, every single day someone's living in that world. For us to be able to try and help do our part, to hopefully inspire the next generation of individuals to go out and follow their lead and go and try and find a cure for something that was previously incurable. What a gift. What a gift to the next generation. What a gift to someone that you've never met before. You're impacting a life that, it's a nameless, faceless person. But the work that these finalists are doing, the work that we're helping to inspire and to celebrate, is an absolute game changer.
To share his insights on harnessing tech and AI to improve health around the world, please welcome Dr. David Rue.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Rue, and I'm the Global Chief Medical Officer for Microsoft. By way of background, I'm an infectious disease doc who took care of patients during the AIDS era. And during that time, I saw firsthand the dramatic impact that the virus could have on society, and also the vital importance that collaboration and coordination of care plays in battling disease. Today, we're faced with another deadly virus, SARS-CoV-2, and this virus has spread across the globe and impacted so many lives. When the virus first hit Kirkland, Washington, which is not too far away from Seattle, we saw firsthand that hospitals and health systems were unable to handle the deluge of calls and visits to the ERs and the clinics. And working in collaboration with our partner, Providence Health System, we customized a COVID-19 health bot to answer questions and streamline the triage. And anecdotally, we saw a 30 to 40% reduction in the call volumes and reduced foot traffic to the emergency departments. Since then, the bot has been deployed throughout the US and globally. And to date, the COVID health bot has delivered over 1 billion messages. Today, however, the COVID has progressed and we see new challenges every day continuing to emerge. And in response, Microsoft has leaned in to provide support across 4 major pillars. The first is testing, working in collaboration with partners to provide inexpensive, convenient COVID testing. We've enabled safer return to work, school, and allowing us to be able to better understand where the disease is and the variants that are present in the different communities. We're also working across the globe and providing support to organizations to help in their ability to boost the disease tracking and the emergency response capabilities. Specifically, I'd like to call out the work that we're doing with regard to the Africa Pathogen Genomics initiative. In terms of R&D or research and development, we've been accelerating the pace in which AI can be applied to improve diagnostics and therapeutics. A real good example is the work that we've done with adaptive biotechnology to launch the T-Detect COVID test, which, by the way, received emergency use authorization from the FDA to confirm recent or prior COVID infections. Vaccinations has been a big part of our effort as well. And as you can imagine, it's about delivering vaccines to as many individuals as quickly as possible, but it's also about ensuring an equitable distribution of the vaccines so that high-risk, vulnerable individuals aren't left behind. And as we think about the next stage about returning to work, school, and travel, one example of how we're starting to realize that this can be deployed is managing it through community health hubs. Some of the work that we've been doing with the Los Angeles Unified School District, for instance, in terms of doing testing and vaccinations and enabling kids and faculty to return to school has allowed us to be able to understand the critical role that communities can play in helping battle the pandemic. But one of the things that we've seen throughout the pandemic is the importance of healthcare workers. And unfortunately, healthcare workers are in trouble. Recent studies have shown that about 50% of physicians and nurses are burned out. And a large part of this has occurred even before COVID started. And a contributor to that is the documentation requirements, the administrative burdens that we require clinicians to do to document into EHRs. Working in collaboration with one of our partners, Nuance Technologies, we developed and launched a technology that can address this. And the technology is called Dragon Ambient Experience. And what it essentially does is it converts voice to text. It then structures it into a progress note or a history and physical, and then integrates this into the electronic health record. I'd like to show a quick video to give you an idea of what this looks like and the impact it's having.
As a patient, you notice that your physician is typing and talking and, Yeah, okay, yeah.
Before, in a typical week, I would probably spend 6 to 8 hours documenting, just simply dictating and signing notes. I bet that my time has been cut into half, if not thirds, because of Nuance now.
The same technology is now available as part of a telehealth visit, which leads us to one of the biggest transformations that we have seen during the pandemic, which is the rise of telehealth and virtual care. Studies have shown a 200-fold increase in virtual and telehealth visits during the pandemic. And while much of the focus has been on video visits between a patient and a clinician, there is one example that highlights an untapped opportunity to transform medical education, training, and accessibility of healthcare globally. Let's run this video to see what this looks like.
I'm not just looking at the pictures. I can interact with those images in that video. What was your plan in terms of incisions?
So my initial plan was to make an elliptical incision.
Sometimes it's actually helpful to do a circular incision. I'm just going to trace out for you what I'm thinking.
It was so clear now. How I would have approached it would not have offered me the advantage.
In healthcare, we rely on the see one, do one, teach one model of medical training. This is unfortunately not scalable. With the HoloLens 2, with the Dynamics 365 remote assist, we now have an ability to extend skill training and mentorship virtually, which democratizes healthcare for all. In closing, I'd like to share 3 final thoughts regarding the pandemic. And the first involves public health. Now is the time for governments to invest in public health infrastructure at both the local and the global level. The data need to be interoperable. It needs to be shared in a protected and transparent manner and made more predictive through artificial intelligence. Second is around healthcare. Hospitals and healthcare workers are battling the virus and saving lives. We need to do more to ensure that hospitals and clinicians do not get overwhelmed and overloaded. Now, technology can help, but a large part of this is community-wide adherence to public health measures. And the last is about people. The pandemic has shown us how closely interconnected we all are. Today, we live in a divided world, but the virus doesn't care. Infections can travel from one group to the other, from one region to the other. There are no boundaries. To address this, we need to embrace collaboration, respect, and inclusion. Collaboration to expand our capabilities, to accelerate the progress we're making. Respect for public health measures and the science that underlies those recommendations and the suffering that people have had to endure, not only clinically, but also economically and emotionally. And lastly, inclusion, to ensure that with all of the progress that we are continuing to make, that we do not leave behind the most vulnerable and high-risk individuals. Thank you very much.
To discuss the ethics of data and AI, please welcome Dr. Amy Abernethy, Professor Rosalind Picard, and moderator Dr. Warren von Eschenbach.
Welcome. My name is Warren von Eschenbach. I'm Associate Vice President, Assistant Provost, and a faculty member at the University of Notre Dame. And I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished panelists, 2 preeminent scientists and leaders in their respective fields who are going to guide us in our discussion about the ethics of data and artificial intelligence. Joining us, we have Dr. Amy Abernethy, who is the Principal Deputy Commissioner of the United States Food and Drug Administration. Welcome, Amy. And Dr. Rosalind Picard, who's a professor of MIT Lab, Chief Scientist and Chairman of Empatica. Welcome to you as well, Roz. Thanks for being here. As we know, artificial intelligence has great promise to improve the efficiency of healthcare and delivery of patient care. However, there's a need to minimize some of the ethical risks associated and to understand how we can integrate these technologies in clinical practices so that traditional goods such as privacy, patient autonomy, and transparency are protected. And so I'd like to ask our panelists a series of questions around this theme and would like to begin with you, Dr. Picard. You literally wrote the book on affective computing. Can you tell us a little bit about affective computing, how things have evolved and developed over the course of the nearly 25 years since the book was published, and what future progress do you envision or see in this field?
Yes, affective computing with an A, although hopefully nicely confused with effective computing, is computing that relates to, arises from, or deliberately influences human emotion. And it has evolved enormously over the last decades. It went from being really a crazy idea. Some people thought I was nuts to propose that machines would have skills of emotional intelligence. And now we see lots of technology out there, some of it inside things you might expect. Like if there's a robot going around interacting with people and it has cameras for eyes, you expect it to see if you're smiling or frowning. You expect it to listen to your tone of voice if you're upset. In fact, people are still trying to get their speaking devices on their kitchen countertops to understand that they are upset. So some of it still has a ways to go. But the understanding of the importance of emotional intelligence is out there. What may be more surprising is some progress that's been made in how technology can help understand emotion for health and for other purposes, most of which I think are very good, but some of which are also very concerning.
Terrific. Can you say a little bit more about some of these ethical issues that as AI moves into affective computing and we may have emotional capacities with artificial intelligence, and maybe some regulations that may help or hinder?
Yeah, I do think we need, it's funny, generally I'm not a big regulation person. I think we need to be careful about fostering innovation, but I do think we need more regulations than we have in this space right now. And they're sort of the obvious ones that you two amazing experts here certainly know. When any claims are being made with respect to affect that are medical, for example, we're now doing things in the mental health space. And as we collect data that corresponds to a number that a trained psychiatrist might give in a medical interview that's diagnostic, then those kinds of claims need much more serious vetting and careful studies done around them than somebody just kind of having a fun app on their phone that's trying to see if it can make you smile or make you think of positive things or be more grateful, more kind of in the well-being space. There's a lot of things happening in both areas. Across all of them, however, is a concern about people's privacy. If your data is really being used just on the end device to help you, then, and you can trust that, then usually people are pretty cool with that. If, however, a big technology provider company is using that to decide what kind of products to sell you, and you're not aware that they're doing it that way and you have not opted into that, or if some less benevolent government is using that data to make judgments about your fitness as a member of society and is using that maybe to group people like you into a separate category that doesn't get the same rights as other people in that society, then that's deeply disturbing. And unfortunately, some of that kind of stuff is already going on in the world. So we are aware of this huge spectrum of possibilities. And now we're trying to build AI that not only encrypts things on the end, but that also can selectively help you hide and keep private some of the affective and health information, not just in the usual encryption kinds of ways, but in some other very clever new ways that are very experimental right now.
Great, thank you. And that's a nice transition to Dr. Abernathy, talking about regulation. You've been a leader, really, and an advocate for integrating large data sets and health information to improve the care, patient-centered and personalized medicine. How has the use of large data changed over time in medical research? And what do you see as its promise for the future, and especially from the perspective of the Food and Drug Administration?
I often think about this overall idea that for the person sitting in front of me, her care should be informed by all the people who have a similar health history and illness that look like her and have come before her. And then her health and health history and what happened after she's received care gets reinvested in this overall system of data so that we're continuously learning. And as we accumulate knowledge across time, the process of taking care of people get better and better. And that overall thinking, this whole process of learning from every patient, has been really tagged as this concept of learning healthcare. And it importantly involves the use of accumulating data that's basically all around us and starts to tell the longitudinal health stories of individuals, which when put together as populations helps us understand the contours of illnesses across time, how medical products like drugs perform across time, and also how we can do better in the future. Now, importantly, there's a number of aspects related to today's conversation that are embedded in there. So you asked, how can these pieces be connected better through data? And importantly, as we think about the connection between the different parts of the learning cycle, so the discovery phase, like for example, of discovery of new drugs, to the clinical development phase, like clinical trials and understanding safety and effectiveness, then to the observation of what happens in real world settings after a medical product like a drug is approved by the FDA, and also helping doctors make more confident decisions at point of care. All of those now can be more closely connected through data. And what's interesting about that is that we can also start to move patient experience, patient voice, patient expectations and values earlier in the development process. So as we start to discover and develop drugs, we can better match them to what patients need and worry about, rather than waiting way until after a medical product is approved to figure out whether or not this, fits in to people's lives. Now, if we think about the conversation we're having here around privacy and people's information, this is also, in the context of learning healthcare, a conversation around collecting information from, for example, learning electronic health records, claims data, Fitbits, and other places that reflect your medical journey. And so we've got a lot of responsibility here to learn how to use these data sets confidently and in a way that maintains privacy, and make sure that we have a very public conversation around what do we as individuals want and need to be able to have a trustworthy system that's going to be able to use those data going forward.
And just to follow up a little bit on this issue about privacy, Dr. Abernethy, you've talked about getting to a point in the future where patients can donate information about themselves or medical information for research in the same way we might donate tissue samples or organs and the like. Who owns these data in these studies, and how can we reassure patients that their privacy and autonomy will be safeguarded?
By talking about data donation, I think we open up a new kind of conversation around the use of our data and how we have affirming oversight over where and how it can be used. And so I've really tried to promote this kind of general concept of being able to have a technology underpinning that allows us to make those kinds of decisions around the use of our data, and also be able to, as individuals, be able to think about what would I want to have happen with my data. So for example, I want to donate my data sets to Alzheimer's research or melanoma research, or I hope that my data goes to help discover new specific types of treatments. And so being able to have more insight about what's possible and more specific affirmation around what I want. Now, importantly, within the context of the privacy space, I think we have a lot of responsibility, especially as we go forward and we have more and more data sets that are being put to use every single day in many different ways. And we have laws in place, and we have a responsibility of following those laws. So for example, the HIPAA expectations and regulations. But in 2021 and beyond, I think those laws are insufficient for what we expect in terms of preserving the ascertainment of this is Amy or this is Roz in a particular data set and ascribing directly to an individual. And so we've got a lot of responsibility of having a public conversation around how far our laws can take us and our responsibility to get it right, but also what do we want in the future. So 2 points. One is the importance of the conversation, and I hope that this and other conversations continue to advance our thinking about this. And the second is the need for innovation. It doesn't mean that the way things look right now have to be the way that things look in the future. Perhaps we can create synthetic data sets that maintain, for example, the same underlying characteristics and data representation without being able to be ascribed to any particular individual. Maybe we have new ways of doing analyses that aggregate information so that it can be completely private? I don't know, but I do think we need to let innovation work for us, and we need to expect that.
And speaking of innovation, Dr. Picard, you have a long history of developing technologies to help society, improving healthcare and individual well-being. How are these technologies and AI being used in ways that make decisions or influence decisions about life and death? Who's making those, and how do we ensure they're done properly?
Thanks, and it's such a pleasure to get to answer this. Warren, years ago when I called you, I just had a crazy idea of, could I put AI in a wearable, and would FDA ever be willing to approve something like this? And today I'm thrilled to say it's not only approved for adults and children, it's out there, and I'm hearing from families that it's making a difference, saving lives. And it's not I should be clear, it's not the AI that's saving the lives, it's the AI working with people to save lives. It's the AI detecting constant, continuous little things that we just don't recognize, and then running a very rapid alert to summon somebody, a human, to come at the moment that somebody needs help. In particular, we have clearances now for AIs running on this device that are monitoring for seizures. And the seizure itself is not usually deadly, but there's a period of time afterwards where people, activity in the brain can change in a way that turns off your breathing. And you might think the person's just looking like they're resting after the seizure, but it's a really critical time to make sure there's a human being there in case you stop breathing. So the AI is detecting this event, calling people on your caregiver list, and with your consent, also giving your location with your consent, and bringing somebody there, hopefully giving good instructions of what to do. So this is just one example of AI that's out there right now. There are also lots of other things in the works right now where your smartphone and your wearables are collecting these little changes that have to do with your sleep, your activity, your social interaction, if you choose to share that through your phone. If you choose, it could also read the content of your text. Is your sentiment getting nasty and negative and down and out, or are you a little more hopeful and positive? Are you empathetic? There are all kinds of things that can learn from you. It's a little scary, actually, what's possible these days, today, what's possible, not just in the future. And our job is to figure out how to use that information in a way that people are aware of, consented, fully informed, and benefiting from, and that they are benefiting from it first. Whether it's a life-threatening situation like a seizure, or a long-term disability situation like chronic pain or a mental health condition. And there I'm super excited because we have an opportunity to not only detect very serious events, but I think to see them before they become serious and give people early indications of what are you doing that's making this bad thing more likely to happen. And what are you doing that's making it so that these bad things aren't happening? And then enabling you, of course, to know how to do more of the thing that leads you to have healthy days physically and mentally.
Great.
Can I amplify something that Roz just said, Warren? There's two things that were in your point there, Roz, that I wanted to highlight. One is that I think we had sort of almost the sense in the last decade that AI was going to turn us all into robots, might almost make our world too mechanical. And in fact, use of new technologies and artificial intelligence actually help to basically supplement or complement what we're doing every day and actually point the way for more human interaction. So it can be people plus technology doing the right thing. And I think it's really, really important. And being able to really open up the world in a way that also maintains the humanity is critical. The second thing that you highlighted is that we have to know that the solutions that we're building actually work and work as intended. And that really requires the deliberate and careful evaluation of these solutions by people who develop them, like yourself, as well as the outside review of those solutions by third parties like the FDA, to make sure that we indeed all agree that the solution's working as expected. And that's going to be critical to the AI space going forward. because ultimately we want these solutions to work in a way that actually makes us all more efficient, more effective, and actually more human.
Thank you. For our final question, I'd like to pose to you both, and stepping back a little bit and thinking more in terms of systems and justice. Pope Francis, in his recent encyclical, really called upon us to promote this notion of solidarity, and in particular, a principle that, quote, the lives of all are prior to the appropriations of goods by a few. So how do we ensure these technologies, whether they're the wearable devices, the use of AI, personal medical information, will benefit all individuals, especially the most vulnerable, and not exacerbate existing disparities in healthcare? Roz, would you like to?
Yeah, the insurance part is the hard part. I love the question. And as I think about how things work, in fact, I'll just tell you a story. Recently, we were getting ready to do our next big experiment in how wearables and smartphone data could help forecast and complement what psychiatrists are doing in mental health to scale psychiatry better. And as we're doing that, all of this Black Lives Matter, all this all these racial inequities and injustices, we're getting more attention than ever in the US. And it's funny because we've always known about them, but I don't think we've done enough. And recently we were, really soul searching how to do more. And I realized that we keep working with these top hospitals, with these top partners. And I asked, and we always keep track of the demographics, but we hadn't really looked for different demographics. And so now we're, making a, really prioritized effort to find the groups that have been left out of a lot of these studies and make sure that we're going first and foremost to them. So usually these groups call me up and want to work with me. Suddenly I find myself cold calling people who don't even know I exist and saying, hey, I understand you have a population like this. Can I meet you? Can I talk to you a little bit about what we do? Could we find a way to work together? And it was really, the shoe was kind of on the other foot. I'm learning we've got to build their trust. We've got to earn their trust. They have not been treated well in the past. And I think we have to really make an effort to build relationships that have not been naturally built because we just keep reinforcing our connections that we already have. So I think we need to get people out of their comfort zones, out of their well-funded ivory towers and other places that are making a lot of cool things happening. Get out into the areas of the cities where people have real need and it's been ignored. So that's where we're trying to go now. We have a ways to go. It's definitely not insured yet, but I'm excited about it. I think we have so much to learn and a lot more good we can be doing.
That's a terrific development. Amy, we'll give you the last word on this if you have any thoughts about this particular topic.
So it's such an important topic that I probably could talk for hours. And I think I would like to hit on a couple of things. As Roz was saying, the more that we're thoughtful about making sure that the AI solutions that are being designed are representative of all populations, and we know how they're going to perform for people of many different backgrounds, that's going to be critical, which means that we actually have to have the representation of all individuals in the data sets that are informing the development of these types of solutions. It means we also have to think about when solutions get developed, how people with all different backgrounds, rural, urban, et cetera, are going to be able to access them, and what does that look like? And then the last two things, one is we actually have to invest in the research to expose the gaps so that we can then address them. And we need to invest in the conversations to make sure that we're all at the same table looking for solutions together. As government, I think we can make sure that we're making investments in a thoughtful way, and we talk in a very inclusive way about what we need to do. And we also need to build partnerships all across industry, nonprofits, academia, other government organizations to keep talking about how we find solutions together.
That's wonderful. I know we could go on for a long time. It is an important topic, but unfortunately we have to stop there. Thank you both for being with us today, and especially thank you for all you do on behalf of patients everywhere. Take care.
Yeah.
Joining us now to talk about extending care through telemedicine and remote monitoring, please welcome Ryan Howard, founder and CEO 100+, Dr. Roy Schoenberg, president and CEO of Amwell, and moderator Dr. Mehmet Oz, Emmy Award-winning host of The Dr. Oz Show and cardiothoracic surgeon.
Half of the world's population lacks access to essential healthcare services. Telehealth exploded during the pandemic. Now we hear from two people, two experts, who have deployed it to expand access, reduce costs, and improve care for chronically ill patients. I'm joined now with Dr. Roy Schoenberg of Amwell and Ryan Howard of 100 Plus. It's great to be here with both of you. Roy, let me start with you. The pandemic changed healthcare as we know it. I think we're all sort of grappling with what that means, what the patients and providers want from care as we move forward, and where do virtual care technologies fit in?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I think, the expectation is, rightfully so, that healthcare will join, the fate of other industries that embrace technology as a way to do their business. Retail and banking and entertainment, the Netflix, the Ubers of the world and everything else. We have seen during the pandemic that healthcare can travel over technology. The debate about whether that is safe or helpful and what its role is in healthcare is literally overnight over. And I think we all have an expectation that the future of our healthcare experience will blend the delivery of healthcare over technology to where we are. And I think that's, if there's a silver lining, it's hard to find one during the pandemic, but we have definitely moved a generation forward in our understanding on how these technologies can make our life much, much better.
Yeah, Dr. Oz, I agree with Roy. I think that the emergence of telemedicine has been coming forth for over a decade now. It's been incredibly slow to build comfort with the doctors, to get them to adopt technology within the practice, and also to ensure that the patient is comfortable over the connection and using the new technology as well. And to Roy's point, the silver lining is that technology was at least accelerated by 5 years, probably 10 years during the pandemic. So effectively, this force, because patients were no longer comfortable going into the doctor's office, and the doctor's office, which was previously a safe place to go, was arguably an infectious environment during the pandemic, the doctors had to adopt new technology and the patients had to also do that as well. And so we see a lot more comfort, especially amongst seniors who are generally not as tech savvy as the younger generation. And we've seen a lot of pickup of these products during the pandemic.
So let's get into the details on that. What kinds of at-home monitors are in use right now? Can you give us some concrete examples, things that can happen at home that used to always happen in the doctor's office? And can monitoring really improve outcomes?
Yeah, so what we see is that the product we offer has a number of different pieces of hardware that are FDA approved. So blood pressure, blood sugar, weight scales, and then thermometers and O2 saturation. And these are obviously for conditions like hypertension, obesity, CHF. So the ability to deploy these devices because of the emergence of IoT, meaning that these devices are cell-enabled. When they land at a patient's house, they don't require smartphones and Bluetooth and apps to be downloaded. They seamlessly send data on a daily basis to the practitioner and remind the patient to be compliant as well. This allows doctors to, real time, look across their entire patient population. And the systems they have population health management. So they're identifying the most at-risk patients based on American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, and CDC guidelines. So instead of looking across just 1,000 patients and seeing a lot of data, it's segmenting the ones with the highest risk so the practitioner can reach out and engage. So these are pragmatic applications that are happening on hundreds of thousands of patients in the US today.
How long do you think until we're going to have hard data showing that these early warning systems can affect outcomes? Or do we have some already?
Roy, do you want to take that? Or I'm happy to as well.
No, I was going to comment on something else. I mean, I fully agree with you. There's truly an explosion in sensors and detectors and all of these different devices in the home that can help us understand what's going on with the patient. I think sometimes, we get distracted by shiny objects of technology and miss the story. The question is, to what purpose? So yeah, some glucometers are better than others and blood pressure cuffs and everything else. I think we're beginning to see, we're coming out of the woodwork and are beginning to see the opening where the purpose of all of these is if they work in conjunction to allow patients to stay home. Mm-hmm. and be reassured that that is not negligence in terms of their medical care, but rather a place that they can be safe, that they can be monitored, and that the cavalry of healthcare services can come in case something goes the wrong way. But that is a huge, huge promise, because it means that as people, we can stay where we want to be. Nobody wants to be sucked into the belly of the beast of healthcare, into a skilled nursing facility or a clinic or a hospital or whatever it is. It's the combination of technologies, sensors, remote patient monitoring, telehealth technologies, and a lot of other services around them that are beginning to come up with a good story that will allow us to stay home, which is the purpose. And I think that's an amazing change in how our life is going to look like in the next literally decade or so.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous point, Roy. So Dr. Oz, the pandemic catalyzed technology, the adoption and comfort of utilizing the technology. The reality is that life is going back to the way it used to be, right? People are taking their mask off and things will resume. And the reality is that with senior citizens in particular, who were the most vulnerable population during the pandemic, they, as Roy mentioned, the staying home issue is a problem, and getting healthcare at home, that bridge is really critical. Now, without a pandemic, senior citizens, they're usually making about $17,000 a year on Social Security. So they're not using Uber or Lyft. And so healthcare for them is a binary, it's a 0 or 1. They're either, our data shows the average senior citizen with three chronic conditions, right? They are not going to the doctor on a monthly basis as they should be. They usually show up once a year. So they're using, obviously, the hospital and the ER room for primary care. And this is, the difference between a $50 visit and a $50,000 visit. And so the ability to give access to that person who simply can't afford to even get to the practice and get to the doctor, this technology enables that.
I gotta say, the field moving so quickly, it's good to have two world experts speaking to it. So I want to try to understand a bit more about the evolution. And let's start with telehealth. So I know that it was sort of moving along. I've been following this space for a while. We're seeing this tool provide urgent care visits to actually used to be urgent care. Now it's not even that anymore. Now it's just regular care for chronically ill patients. What are the most impactful telehealth use cases that you're seeing, Roy?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, if we had this conversation, 3 or 4 years ago, telehealth was urgent care apps and telestroke. These are kind of the big stories of telehealth. And today, the reality is that, where I come from, we operate over 150 different types of telehealth. So the world has changed, very dramatically. I think the biggest difference, and we've actually seen this during COVID, is that while there was a kind of a big hike during COVID of people who were using telehealth for urgent care because they were locked in their homes, there were no outpatient clinics, no retail clinics, PCP offices were closed. Nobody wanted to be in an ER during the pandemic. So people were using it for urgent care. But then about a month later, we started seeing a completely different revolution kind of imposed over that, where clinicians started embracing telehealth to catch up with the patients that they had a responsibility for. And these are not urgent care patients. It wasn't even used to generate a diagnosis. They know those patients for years with diabetes and heart failure and everything else. And they started using telehealth regularly to manage those patients who are homebound. The first revolution of urgent care came and kind of went, with the relaxing rules of COVID. That other revolution that almost you couldn't see is now by far the biggest wave that we see that is redefining telehealth.
And I look at some of the heart data here. Let me just present something from Insider Intelligence. Estimated 30 million US patients, 30 million will use remote patient monitoring tools by 2024. That's about a 28% growth from today. Should the growth be even higher than that? Ryan, take that question. Also, do you think it can continue after we conquer COVID-19, or just a bit of a blip and we'll sort of go back down towards where we were in 2019?
Yeah, look, I think that, to be frank, I think that there will be a slight drop in the sense that people like to go see their practitioner in person. So I think that obviously some things will return to normal. The other reality is that some things cannot be done remotely. So if you need diagnostics done, if you need lab tests done, remotely makes that really, really challenging. Not impossible, but more challenging. There's not a lot of really streamlined workflows for that today. But the net is that the telemedicine traditionally has been for these kind of small acute events, a cold, more superficial things. And with remote patient monitoring is the data, right? And without data during the visit, without blood pressure and other critical vitals, the visit just becomes a FaceTime with grandma. And so effectively, we definitely see that, the tools have been implemented, tools like American Well, which Roy runs. And so the doctors have the tools are not going away, and the comfort has been built with the patients as well. Now, beyond that, what we've seen is that our program that we serve is a Medicare program. And since 2019, it's expanded from Medicare fee-for-service to Medicare Advantage to about half of the states cover remote patient monitoring for Medicaid as well. Over the last few months, 17 states have mandated that remote patient monitoring is now reimbursed by private payers. That means anyone on the call right now that's under 65 that has a chronic condition will be served and reimbursed for remote patient monitoring as well. So the market's tremendous. The market cap's obviously significant. And then, it really maps to chronic conditions. And like Roy said, the ability to access these patients remotely, because it's the in-between those, that 10-month period where a patient's not having a visit is where the episodic event happens. So bridging that gap is what RPM does. And employers behind this, obviously the payers are, and now the practitioners and patients are as well.
RPM being remote patient monitoring has become such a popular phrase that has become one of those largos that doctors speak with. Roy, it seems like we've got the awareness hurdle jumped. So people now have an understanding of what telemedicine and telehealth can provide to them. What's needed going forward to make it a more sustainable part of care delivery? And what are the biggest challenges you're going to have to overcome in AmWell?
Yeah, it's interesting that we're sitting here and now saying, licensure is not going to be an issue anymore and reimbursement is going to be fine and all of that kind of stuff. And as you said, awareness is in a good place. To me, I think the biggest hurdle that we have is that we're still in the wrong mindset about telehealth. We still think of telehealth as a replacement of an office visit. So instead of going to the physical office, take the bus and get there and sit and wait and see the doctor, you're going to use technology to do so. And I think that is something that has to change, because we fundamentally underestimate what telehealth is going to do to the practice of medicine. We have to rethink from the ground up, how do we surround cancer patients? How do we allow ourselves to walk in and out of their environment and give them the support and all of the disciplines that need to participate in making sure that they can battle chemotherapy and the struggles that they have? How do we use telehealth to democratize the availability of healthcare in places around the country or places around the world that is not physically available? How do we rethink about services that can allow people to gracefully age in their home, which includes a lot of sensors and remote patient monitoring? Telehealth is not a replacement. It's not another channel by which the same office visit would happen. It is an instrument of change to the practice of medicine and to the availability of healthcare services. And the moment that people will step back and start thinking about this way, we're going to see the same change as the change that Amazon introduced to retail. It wasn't just the ability to get a book online, it changed anything and everything that we know about how goods travel from the people who make them to the people that use them. That's right ahead of us.
Yeah. And Ryan, following up from that, what should we expect to see in this space as we move forward in, let's say, the next 5 years? And to help me understand and everyone understand, what happened in 2020 that's going to facilitate what you predict?
Yeah, I think the big point that I've been stuck on is obviously comfort, right? The adoption of the tools aren't going to go away. And now that that's happening, expansion within a practice's patient population. I think what will change, Mehmet, is that most of the devices today, while they are cellular and connected, which is fantastic, there's still a barrier to entry, meaning the patient has to go to that device on a daily basis. And, stepping on a scale is a relatively low barrier to entry, but there's meaningful behavior change there. Taking blood glucose or checking your blood pressure when you previously weren't on a daily basis is meaningful change, especially for a senior citizen. Passive monitoring for many vitals and many biometrics will be the next step. It's probably still a few years off. Most of the CGM, constant glucose monitoring out there is invasive, right? It's basically a piece of technology that goes into the arm and penetrates the skin. And so effectively, we are seeing technologies on the wrist and other parts of the body that are collecting blood pressure, blood glucose, and other vitals in perpetuity. And the ability to do that and make that so the patient's persistently participating in the program without any patient intervention is going to be really critical and will change the dimension of healthcare as well.
Yeah, Roy and Ryan, thanks for all these great insights. I think you'll actually be getting all the data that we make decisions on. It won't be looking at studies from 10 years ago. It'll be prospectively gathered data that drives decisions tomorrow morning. God bless you both. Godspeed on all your great work. Keep making the future brighter for all of us.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks for having us.
Judy Faulkner, founder and CEO of Epic, and moderator Moira Forbes, Executive Vice President of Forbes, will discuss healthcare data and the COVID crisis.
During COVID-19, the need to share insights generated from electronic health records became more important than ever, with a sense of urgency that sparked an unprecedented collaboration amongst doctors, scientists, hospitals, and other stakeholders. In the middle of the pandemic, Judy Faulkner launched the Epic Health Research Network to empower that data sharing among them. Over 100 million patients are included in that database. The founder and CEO of Epic is here to tell us about this new initiative. Judy, welcome. Thank you.
Hi, Maura. Thank you.
You were such a pioneer in electronic health records. You founded your company over 40 years ago, which is 1.5 employees, $70,000. Fast forward today, over 10,000 employees, $3 billion in revenue. And what's extraordinary is over 225 million patients within the US are within your system. This offers obviously extraordinary and rich data. In May of last year, you launched the Epic Health Research Network to really bring insight to bear during the heart of the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about that effort, the impetus behind it, and how it began to roll out as to where we are today?
Well, of course, with COVID-19, almost everybody was scared. What is going on? What is this new disease? And so we had so much data there, we started looking at that data. And then when we started looking at it, we said, what do we do with it? How do we get it out? And we thought about getting it to some of the very prestigious and well-known journals, but it would take too long. And so many people were getting sick so quickly. So we decided to create our own journal, ehrn.org, epichealthresearchnetwork.org, that would publish what our findings were. And because there were 100 million patients in it, we immediately had records from patients, de-identified, limited data set. We immediately had a lot of good data that we could share. One of the things that's really interesting is that only about 10% of medical decisions are based on evidence-based medicine, and too much is based on anecdotal information. So we wanted to get the data out quickly. What we did, which I think is really interesting, is we knew that it couldn't be peer-reviewed, but we also knew that it had to be accurate. So we created 2 teams. Each team had doctors, data scientists, software developers on it, and they were given the same charge, but they were also told that they couldn't talk with each other. So they each worked independently, and then we compared results. It was a really interesting way to get simultaneous peer review.
And I love that acceleration which the pandemic caused around so many forces in terms of being able to really bring that muscle of the extraordinary and rich data that you have to bear in a very, very short time frame and get it into the hands of the people who need it most. I'd be curious, because this was a new initiative for you all, and also a new way in which all these stakeholders within the healthcare system were engaging with this data in real time around such a pressing issue. Can you talk a little bit about how that information was then used and helped doctors to treat COVID patients and some examples of the way in which that was seen in day-to-day life with the front lines of care?
Sure. I think one of the first studies we did that was so important was the ventilator survival rate. People were putting patients quickly onto ventilators, and the survival rate was terrible. And one of our health system CEOs just commented that they didn't have enough access to ventilators, so they were putting patients on their side, they were putting them on their stomach, and he thought that maybe the survival rate was higher. So we started doing a study on survival rates with ventilators, which I think really helped a lot of people around the country start putting more patients on their side or on their stomachs and not on ventilators. And I think more people survived. Other things that we did that I think were interesting, we looked at the severity of COVID disease in the elderly, in different ethnicities, in gender. And by finding out where the increased risk was, it could lead to better triage of hospital beds that were limited. We also looked when hydroxychloroquine was being questioned about, does it have an effect on COVID-19? We looked to see if it and other drugs would be helpful if taken in advance. And we didn't find any help on that. Some of the other things that we found that were interesting was we saw a decrease in cancer screenings, a very significant decrease. What is that going to mean coming up next with respect to people getting more severe cases of cancer? And a big dip in childhood immunizations, which some of the health systems now are trying to have programs to try to catch up on that.
Obviously, this effort helped unlock, as you said, ways to think about better and more effective care for COVID, but also some of the ripple effects in terms of things such as screening and the like, the secondary issues and challenges that are being created given the data that you had in front of you. I'd be curious, how do you think this type of data sharing in a more real-time way will be brought to bear in terms of new therapies, treating patients in the future, and creating this exchange of knowledge in really an extraordinary way? What does this mean for the future of care?
Well, a few things. A lot of people say that it takes between 14 and 17 years for new information to get used. That's a big problem. When there is good new information and new therapies that should be used, how do you get that out? So I think this could help as it goes and feeds back to the physician taking care of the patient. So one of the things that we can do with Cosmos is when the clinician is seeing a patient, Cosmos can then look at other patients who are similar to the patient that clinician is seeing and say something like 18,000 got drug A, 22,000 got drug B, 13,000 got operation C, and give the data about the successes of each of those to the clinician so the clinician can make a more valid decision that's based on evidence-based data. So that could come right away and not wait those 14 years.
That's such a staggering number when you say 14 years in terms of the cycle of innovation as it relates to health, and the pace of unrolling that information is unbelievable. And hopefully, obviously, that will continue to change given the ways in which in the models that you're bringing to bear that others can learn from. The data that you all saw, not just in terms of the how patients were being treated, but the way they were being treated was also really interesting. I want to shift gears to one other front, and that's telemedicine. Obviously, you saw this extraordinary surge in telemedicine doctor visits. At one point, I think your team, I read, studied 2.7 million doctor visits, saw 2.7 million doctor visits over a 6-week period, extraordinary advances in telemedicine. That's going to and continue to roll back as we can be in person again. But what is the future of things like telemedicine, and where do we go from here as it relates to that dynamic within the healthcare system?
Well, it was really interesting, excuse me, watching telemedicine and how that took off. Before COVID, telehealth was about 0.2% of the visits. At its height, depending on the area of the country and the health systems, it went to about 44%, and in some cases to 85% of the visits. We're seeing it go down now. It's going down to a range between 14% and 25%. Where we're seeing it stay the most is with behavioral health. So I think the folks in behavioral health are very anxious to continue it there. One of the things I thought was really interesting with COVID is that it allowed physicians who were staying home to use their equipment at home to still see patients using telehealth.
And obviously we all know that the need for behavioral health care is continuing to rise and climb in this country. And one of the silver linings, of course, of the pandemic is unlocking these new, more accessible and scalable ways for care. As we wrap up the conversation, I started by mentioning that you founded this extraordinary company 40 years ago. The past year with the pandemic has leapfrogged and shifted our businesses in such profound ways and extraordinary rate of change in a matter of months. What changes do you think we'll see from Epic because of your experience with COVID-19? How has it reshaped how you think about the possibilities of your company now, but also what it represents in the future?
We have a saying here, when things are quiet, build. And things were quieter, not because we weren't very busy, but because we weren't traveling as much as so many of us are now. More homebound. And so what we did was really interesting, I think. First of all, we learned to do installs that were quicker and more remote. Secondly, we learned to take care of patients using the software at home. So some of our health systems had just too many patients for the beds, but they needed to be cared for. So they sent them home, and the software began to care for them, hooking up devices and sending the data back to the health systems. It was really a wonderful new way to help take care of patients, but at their home. And then if the patient was getting worse, it would alert the health system to come in and intervene. We started creating a radio show called Epic Radio, and its purpose is to help the clinician use the software better so that the clinician can be an effective, good user and take better care of patients that way, and also enjoy the system more and find it easier to use. We also are creating, and Epic Radio is due out in another month or two, a website called Epic Share, because almost all of the executives of our health systems want to know what are the others doing that they could stand on their shoulders and do too. So that is Epic Share. So those are some of the things we're doing right now that probably wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for COVID.
Well, thank you, Judy, because your pioneering and entrepreneurial spirit has created a company that has truly transformed the healthcare system in this country and obviously around the world. And also in the past year, you've been such an extraordinary leader and continuing to push new models of care and representing what's possible in terms of really bringing better care, breakthrough technologies, and this extraordinary collaboration of stakeholders in the healthcare system to bear at such a critical time. So thank you so much for those insights, and it was great speaking with you.
Thank you, Moira. It was good to see you again.
This conversation on the next generation of giving will be led by Moira Forbes, Executive Vice President of Forbes, and feature 3 philanthropists. Please welcome Emma Bloomberg, Founder and CEO of Murmuration, Spencer Eccles, Chairman and CEO of the Eccles Foundation, and Dr. Stephen Shaya, Managing Director of Akkad Holdings and Executive Servant Leader at J&B Medical.
The next generation of philanthropists we'll be hearing from in just a moment are reinventing what it means to do good. Each of them has a unique vision and strategy in their efforts to address some of the world's most intractable problems. We'll be discussing how they're tackling issues that are important to them and the strategies behind those efforts that all of us can learn from as we think about having an impact in the world around us. Joining me is Emma Bloomberg, Spencer Eccles, and Dr. Stephen Shaya. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us.
I want to start off because the theme of this session is around the next generation of philanthropy, and the profile of today's philanthropists is changing in markedly different ways. It's not necessarily just writing a check. There's a desire for real and measurable results, and also harnessing the power of the private sector or other industries to bring to bear in the philanthropic space. Stephen, I want to start with you, sort of set the frame of this conversation. How do you think about and how do you define this concept of giving in 2021 in terms of how you approach philanthropy and also its evolution in terms of what people are looking for around how to have the greatest impact?
Thank you, Moira. And first, I wanted to thank the Cura Foundation, Robin Smith, and my fellow panelists for this opportunity. So thank you, everyone. So the way we look, and my family looks at giving, is we break it into two different areas. There's charity, which is a little more emotional, and it's more focused on rescue and relief. And philanthropy, which is much more strategic and a long-term thinking. There's a Hebrew word called tzedakah, which means giving. And there's an implication of social justice. And there's also an implication that you become closer to your faith when you give. Impact investing really means to us, it's very closely tied into a parable that Jesus gave to the disciples about the sower and the seeds. And that a farmer sends his seeds indiscriminately. Some of the seeds land on rock. Some of the seeds land on decent soil, and some of the seeds land on fertile soil. So the seeds that land on the rock, kind of like charitable giving with no focus, with no purpose, and the intention is good, but you don't really get the impact. There's no leverage, there's no catalytic type of effect. The good soil equates to the high leverage, catalytic type of environment in which you can get a lot of different impactful type of changes: job creation, self-sufficiency, social justice, environmental protection, upward mobility, economic empowerment to people and families and ecosystems, professional fulfillment, self-esteem, and so many other type of benefits. So for us, it really where we see that parable, and it kind of reminds us of our giving, that not only do you want to give, but you want to put it on the right soil so that it can grow exponentially. And we're only human when we see the humanity and help elevate the lives of other people. We truly believe that. There's so much more to giving than just writing a check. It's really putting your heart, your soul, your spirit into it. And that's when we talk about giving, that's how we see it.
I think you bring up a great point that it's this obviously something that is very personal, giving of your heart, but also thinking about in certain instances around how to have the greatest scale and impact or sustain change around issues that may be important to you. Spencer, I'll turn to you. You come from a very philanthropic family. When you look at the communities that you serve, it's in the healthcare systems, arts, cultural institutions, preservation projects, and the like. And there's a lot of interest and work in really supporting the communities around you. How do you approach philanthropy and evaluate need and giving? And has there been an evolution over the years in terms of how you look at to have the greatest impact with the money, the resources, and the time that you all invest in these communities?
Well, thanks for asking a question, Moira. I really appreciate it. I love the way Stephen framed it, where he talks about good seeds and then also where you plant those seeds. And for us, when we think about it, first of all, there's 5 key principles: focus, the need, the impact, the sustainability, and then the personal involvement that Stephen just ended on. And as you think about focus, the originators of many of the foundations we're involved with, including our own family, started with really delineating where we wanted to put our attention. You mentioned some of the areas: arts and culture, community, education, health and wellness, preservation, conservation. That's one of the focal points of one of the foundations we're involved with. And I kind of hark back to this quote from George S. Eccles, who was the founder of one of the foundations, the George and Dolores Dore Eccles Foundation, where he says, "It is our duty to be mindful of our responsibilities and the problems that confront this country and pledge ourselves to aid in every possible way." And I think that is the core. When you think about the need, where is the greatest need? Being able to focus in on that. But again, that focus and then driving in on the need, and then the impact. Where do you utilize your dollars? And finally, when you think about sustainability, how can you be a catalyst for good? And that's one of the key areas for us, whether it's first dollars in or matching dollars or last dollar in, based on moving the foundation or the nonprofit that's looking for dollars, helping them move forward. And that's the key at the end of the day for us, is not just the impact, but is it sustainable? And in some cases, it shouldn't be. Some cases, you just have to fill a need. But in other cases, you definitely want to see what the sustainability is and who else is joining in, and how can we kind of broaden the bench and broaden the effort so that it's not just relying upon one group of funders. And then on the other side of that sustainability, how can you ensure that the nonprofit or the group that's out there looking for the dollars, how can you help them become more self-sufficient? I think that's the end goal.
You bring up a great point that there's this desire to have, I think, an evolving intentionality in terms of who and how you give, in the sense of really understanding the reasons behind it. To your point, the catalytic effect, the stakeholders involved, but really thinking, I would imagine, from a much holistic perspective in terms of where and how to leverage your philanthropic opportunities within your communities. Emma, I'd be curious, in chatting with you, you sit at a really interesting intersection. Philanthropic experiences. You have experience as a philanthropist. You're a board member at Bloomberg Philanthropy that works towards ensuring better, longer lives for the greatest number of people and across so many different dimensions, but really that scale. But you also started Murmuration, which is a really interesting organization in the ways in which you mobilize political campaigns, advocates, and organizers to in support of communities, and really around the opportunity to have the greatest access to high quality public education. Can you talk about the differences of those experiences and how one informs the other in terms of thinking about really maximizing philanthropic giving, but also strategies and organizations to be the vehicle to do that?
Absolutely. I think to me, the important thing really is to have philanthropy and programmatic support working as cooperatively as possible. One of the things we're increasingly trying to do at Murmuration is to help to coordinate the strategies of our partner organizations, funders, and our partners themselves, right? So funders, myself included, right? We seek out these organizations because we have a deep belief in the change that we want to see in the world, but we're not the experts to actually do it, right? They're the ones on the ground actually affecting the change. And so for Murmuration, as an example, we have partners on the ground who are running organizing and advocacy and electoral campaigns. And sometimes there's this issue where funders have their set of metrics, and those metrics aren't necessarily aligned with how to run the most effective campaigns over time. So, you sort of very generously said I sit at this really interesting intersection. I do think it's an interesting intersection because one of the things that I'm increasingly getting to do is to really try to build that bridge between the organizations and the funders, and really help funders and organizations identify metrics that provide funders with the comfort that their dollars are actually affecting change, but that also really help our partners become more effective over time. We want to help our partners develop the most effective political strategy and run smarter campaigns, and funders need to understand the potential for those efforts to drive impact. So I guess, I'd say you can't do any of the work without the investment and the money, but you also won't get the impact without the planning and execution. And, we just need to think about how we fit those pieces together every time we make a grant.
I think you make such a good point in terms of when we think about this giving ecosystem, there is and I love that sort of analogy of you all being the bridge. I think there is a huge need to be able to align stakeholders and align incentives, so that you can really have the momentum and the sustainability around giving. And we're seeing a lot of that alignment, obviously now, I think, in the business sector as well, where leaders of some of today's most dynamic organizations are in this really privileged position where, as technology and their global reach are giving them greater power and opportunity, there's a chance for them to create social value and to really contribute and infuse purpose in their organizations and contribute in communities in ways that really were not part of DNAs of organizations before. Stephen, you run Cloud Holdings, which is a family office that invests in various areas. As you think about investment in the private sector, how much weight do you give that sense of purpose or community responsibility into the investment decisions that you're making around how to improve the world? And can you talk a little bit about the importance of catalytic capital?
Well, I think most funders are looking at different ways where their capital is going to be transformational. And to Spence's point, is going to be sustainable. I think sustainability is very, very important. A lot of, I think philanthropy is evolving that in that the sense that there are certain things for me being in the healthcare space where people are looking at making investments, being the initial risk taker in new kind of drug development opportunities, where maybe traditional investors would see it as high risk, but other people are looking at it as how do we solve some of the biggest problems? How do we make change happen? And I think philanthropists are really looking more and more at collaborating. And I think catalytic capital to me is the capital that can be the initial capital, but help bring various leaders in government and businesses and help bring everyone together. Emma talks about alignment. To me, that's one of the biggest problems in philanthropy. You have this family and this group doing something. You have that stakeholder doing something else. Bringing everyone together and maximizing and optimizing something that'll be not only sustainable, but lasting and maximize effectiveness has been very, very difficult. So I think that catalytic capital, the force of capital, really is critical. So I'll give you an example. In Rwanda, there was a program that started in October of 2017 around nutrition, some nutritional programs for mothers. A donor, donated $10 million to that. And that initial capital became $116 million over 4 years. And the Rwandan government was able to build a whole nutritional program, education, and awareness that has been able to help move the needle, particularly around mothers. So the force of capital cannot be underestimated, but the key to Emma's point is alignment. How do you get the government, the philanthropists, and all the business folks together and all rowing in the same direction?
We're talking about these forces that are changing the dynamics of philanthropy. Stephen, you're talking about this desire for alignment. Spencer, so much of the work that you guys are focused on are in the communities that your family is a part of, bringing private and public sector efforts together. I'd be curious, when we think about these forces that are changing philanthropy moving forward and this desire to understand where are the most pressing needs and how do we really think about this concept of catalyzing opportunity, investing in philanthropic models of the future. I'd be curious how the pandemic has influenced how you think about giving and working within the communities that you serve.
Well, I appreciate that. Thinking about what Emma said and what Stephen kind of expanded on, as you think about alignment, as you think about synergy, when COVID hit, we were all just absolutely shell-shocked. And as we looked around as a family, where was the need? And at that moment, there weren't a lot of people coming to us necessarily. Where sometimes as a philanthropist or in the foundations, you're catcher's mitt. You just wait for things to come to you. There are other times when you have to be a hunter. You have to look for the problem and search to find out how to solve it. And we saw just an absolute just overwhelming volume of information pouring in, conflicting, complex, very difficult to navigate. And so at that moment, we very quickly talked as a family, which we meet very regularly. And I contacted the dean of the David Eccles School of Business. And then I followed up with Mike Leavitt, former Utah governor, and he later served as the Secretary of Health and Human Services under George W. Bush, where he formulated, with a $7 billion budget, a pandemic plan. And within 2 weeks, we had funded and pulled in a few other parties to help with that, but funded a series, executive education series titled COVID-19, How to Save Your Business. We started on April 3rd. We ended on May 29th. We did 15 series. And in that, we had over 17 or 18,000 views of Utahns, business leaders, and not just business, but also nonprofits, trying to help them navigate this terrible pandemic, but from the real human business side. And the number one goal was to provide immediate assistance to the business leaders and the nonprofit leaders by helping them reframe this daunting economic landscape that was facing them, and to share actionable, timely tools that they could take and immediately that day, the second they got off the video chat that we had and the training, and implement that in their business. And we knew that businesses needed to get their foot on a rock. So with that, we ended up also having Senator Mitt Romney on, Randall Quarles, a former Undersecretary of Domestic Finance and the Vice Chair of Supervision for the Fed, and others, as well as business leaders that were in the trenches, sharing their experiences of what they went through both in 2008 and now during the pandemic. And I think the result was pretty helpful and immediate for those businesses. But it required us to get involved in a very, very personal level as individuals and helping drive that forward.
I think it really is an example of when there is an urgent need, the ability to mobilize resources. One of the really sort of unique moments and roles that philanthropy can play, but also to your point, the different leaders that you brought together in service of this effort in order to really power it and drive it in the most, in the most impactful way. Emma, as we talk about COVID-19, obviously, the public education system has been one of the potential, fallouts of or areas of huge, conflict and really, in a very, very difficult situation coming out of this pandemic. But you've created an organization that takes a very, very interesting model in where you have really engaged the political sector and are helping power, the political and policy sector as a lever of transformation and education, but doing so from a philanthropy perspective. When we think about all the different levers of change and how to think about our giving efforts, can you talk about the dynamics of politics and policy and putting that at the forefront of an effort?
Absolutely. For some issues, and education is sort of an obvious one, the decisions that impact kids on a daily basis, they're being made by elected officials, and particularly at the local level. So if you want to ensure that those decisions are being made with the right focus, you need allies in key positions, and politics allows for that to happen. But beyond the actual electing of people, politics drives news, it drives the media narrative, it drives public interest. All of these things help to build attention and influence, and that can then be leveraged to really push for change. At Murmuration, our theory of change is really grounded in the idea that people and communities should have a say in shaping their public school systems. And so our focus and sort of broad definition of politics is really on that, right? On empowering the people in communities least well served by the current system. And those communities also tend to be those that are most likely to be disenfranchised or left out of our political system. And so we work to give them power through the democratic process. And I would say, I think as you talk about different levers, yes, politics is the one that we're pulling, but it's not that different from direct service. You have to think about the direct service that we're providing is really giving organizations and people in communities the access to power through democracy.
As we begin to wrap up this conversation, all of you are very obviously deeply committed in terms of the giving space and understanding how to create the greatest scale and impact and efficiency to transform communities and societies at large. I just want to end by asking each of you, what's been one of the greatest insights or lessons learned in terms of how you have become a more impactful philanthropist in the work that you're doing in a way that can give others insight or again a lesson in terms of how they can go about their own work or their own commitments in this space. Stephen, I'll start with you.
So philanthropy is evolving just like every aspect of life, and truly believe that we all need to look at philanthropy with a fresh perspective. There have been some very interesting, I'll say, innovative approaches, particularly around venture philanthropy. I'll give you a real life example. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation invested $150 million into a drug development, Catalytic, which ended up selling, which was made by Vertex Pharmaceuticals, sold to Royalty Pharma over a 10-year period for $3.3 billion. So the efforts around cystic fibrosis now are supercharged to help people live, healthier, more fulfilled lives. And so, but what was interesting about that is that the vehicle, which was a donor-advised, donor advised fund, is not the traditional way of looking at philanthropy. Most people think you give money to a foundation, and the foundation has rules. They give a certain percentage away every year. But is there a way to take philanthropy and supercharge it like the cystic fibrosis folks did? And so I think that all of us need to look at philanthropy in a different way. And it's not just giving away money. How can you take what you're giving and make it exponentially more effective? And I think there's a lot more opportunities around that, Moira, than we realize. And I'm just learning every day from very smart people like we have on the panel here. But I think there's a lot more of those opportunities, and we can really do a lot more good in the world in so many creative and intentional and meaningful ways.
Yeah, you bring a great point though, that you have to keep a fresh, open mind and continuing to stay curious and really be open to the learnings that exist, not just in the philanthropic sector, but across so many industries that then can be harnessed behind these efforts. Spencer, what about yourself?
Oh, well, I think one of the core components for us as a family has been purpose and mission driven. And one of the things that you see over time is not only an evolution of the giving, but sometimes there's some negative impacts that can split apart the effort to give. And having clarity around the mission of the foundation, having clarity around that, then unifying around that purpose. And if everybody can sink their teeth into that purpose and really stay focused there, then individual interests that could pull away from that will eventually become aligned. You can stay together as a family, for example, for us, and that is one of the key things. So the focus on our mission is what has held us together and is what has held the foundations together. And if you want to have a sustainable foundation that not only can evolve over time, but also can maintain its purpose, that is a key to driving it forward. But you also have to have some flexibility in the mandate. So that those two things work closely together. And I think that allows a foundation to evolve over time.
I love that, having your North Star in terms of vision and mission, but being flexible in terms of how you can bring that to life in so many different ways. Emma, I'll close with you. Is there an insight or lesson learned for you that's been particularly transformative in your work within the sector?
Yeah, I'll touch on two, I think. First, my advice is always to look at the opportunities to invest in infrastructure, right? I think programs tend to get more of the sort of public attention, but whether you're talking about political infrastructure or really any other kind of infrastructure, organizations to be successful, they need data and intelligence. They need the ability to share information, to share metrics, to fundraise, to communicate, to create efficiencies. All of that relies on infrastructure. And so investing in that is then allowing those organizations to be more effective and more efficient in actually driving the change that you want to see. And then the other thing I'll just touch on, we've said this a few times throughout this panel. Stephen, I particularly liked your use of the word alignment. But to me, I think a lot about coordination, right? And I think you don't need to fund every organization that cares about the issue that you are prioritizing, right? That you can absolutely pick the ones that you think can drive the most impact. But I think it's important to understand the full landscape of who's working in that space and to think about what cooperation looks like among funders and among the organizations who are actually doing the work on the ground. I think oftentimes organizations feel some pressure from funders to say, my work created this impact, right? But more often than not, it's their work and the work of a number of organizations that they are cooperating with. And for us as funders to be interested in that and to embrace that and to encourage that means that our investment in one organization can actually have ripple effects across lots of organizations in that same space.
I love that. I think you all bring up so many great points around this desire to have clarity, intentionality, but really communication. Communication at the core to understand goals and objectives and to bring everyone together around the same mission. I think the wonderful thing is there is so much passion around these causes and issues, and the key, Emma, as you talked about, is how do you build those bridges to connect these stakeholders together and to get everyone rowing in the same direction and together in a much stronger way. So Emma, Stephen, Spencer, thanks so much for your insights, very, very helpful perspectives, and appreciate you joining this conversation.
Thank you so much, Moira.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
There are many paths to philanthropy. Most involve a version of Ben Franklin's quote, "Do well by doing good." But perhaps few paths to doing good are as tortuous as that taken by Stephen Shaya and his family. The son of Iraqi Christians forced to emigrate to seek religious, political, and economic freedom, Stephen has never forgotten the sacrifices and struggles his forebears endured to allow him the privilege of giving back. His grandmothers instilled a deep sense of family, faith, and community responsibility that has been passed down through the generations. His father was a physician in Iraq who was forced to start from scratch in this country, graduating from medical school, starting and selling a medical lab, and quickly founding a small family business that would grow into the global healthcare enterprise that has given Stephen his platform for doing good. But that wasn't the original blueprint. Stephen would graduate from Wayne State University Medical School with a plan to become a family physician. But as the younger Dr. Shaya puts it, God had a different plan for him. A variety of events led his father to ask him to come to work for the family business, J&B Medical, which Stephen always has to explain is not the Scotch whiskey company. It's named after his brother Julian and grandfather Bashir. Working for a family enterprise, one run by a patriarch who believes in tough love, is never easy. Despite being fired on a regular basis, Stephen helped grow J&B into an international, mission-driven group of companies helping care for millions of people globally, firmly believing that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. He describes his role at J&B as an intrapreneur, the person within the company always looking for new ways to serve that mission, but quietly, no fanfare, no frills. As he says, all steak, no sizzle. The success of J&B has given Stephen the financial wherewithal to establish Akkad Holdings, his family office, which has pursued its goal of giving back through donations to numerous organizations, but never taking its eye off the prize, making sure that when people reach their health potential, only then can they reach their human potential. Stephen firmly believes that God put him on this earth to be a catalyst for access to health care. That is his way of paying it forward. Maya Angelou, the civil rights activist, poet, and author, has said, "A hero is any person really intent on making this a better place for all people." Dr. Shaya is such a person, and so we honor Dr. Stephen Shaya for his work to promote social change through his contributions to improve human health and preserve the environment. Please welcome Dr. William Jackson of the General Authority 70 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to discuss how to improve health globally through medical missionary and humanitarian work.
It is my pleasure and great honor to discuss with you today the topic of medical missionary work. Charity, reaching out to and serving those in need, is a foundational pillar for many of the world's great religions. For centuries, we have witnessed the many humanitarian expressions of personal religious conviction. Indeed, until recently, religious groups were the predominant source of charitable health care. Even today, many provide more aid and are serving in more countries than many governments. Despite the recent explosion of secular NGOs, faith-based groups continue to be ubiquitous geopolitical players of good. Why do they do it? First and foremost, because it is the right thing to do. The need exists. Many believe they will be judged and held accountable for how they treat others, for how they use their talents to lift the arms that hang down and strengthen the feeble knees. They have made personal promises to God to go about doing good. The two great commandments spoken of by Jesus in the Bible are, first, to love God with all your heart and soul, and second, to love one another as He loves us. We demonstrate our devotion for deity by loving and caring for each other. When we are serving our fellow man, we are actually serving God. There are many medical and surgical issues that plague our human family that are fixable. Conditions for which a single simple operation, a single inoculation, or a single medical device or prescription can change the quality of a life dramatically. With need comes responsibility. Time has taught us that there are good, better, and best ways to bless others, and some lessons learned that we would probably rather forget. We have all witnessed unfortunate outcomes that were likely unintended, but very real. My own experience spans many decades and comes from participation and observation of many missions on every inhabited continent. Working with multiple organizations over time has given me, as it has many of you, the opportunity to discover what works and what does not. Many a project is marked by serious waste of resources due to rising overheads, bureaucracy, entrenched attitudes, a woeful grasp of even basic economics and human nature, and innocent ignorance about what would be most beneficial for a certain population. A multi-million-dollar MRI machine feels good to donate, but often sits useless when it can't be maintained or doesn't run on the same voltage available in a given country. Additional common obstacles to successful missions include language barriers, poor awareness of local customs and culture, contrasts between Western science and local beliefs, limited liability and accountability, lack of sustainability and continuity, marginalizing or ostracizing the local medical establishment, poor knowledge of the patients, and claims of evangelism and colonialism, to name but a few. And except in the case of natural disasters or disease outbreaks, the fly-in approach to medical and surgical need has lost much of the luster that it had decades ago, and is actually disliked or unwanted by many recipient communities. Medical missionary work is nearly always well-meaning, but has not always been well received or of much practical benefit. What are some things to consider when providing humanitarian service? What has been shown to really work over time? Let me share just a few lessons learned in no particular order. The mission should meet actual need. A community may not need a new hospital or clinic with all the latest cutting-edge gadgetry if it doesn't have electricity, trained healthcare providers, or a reliable water source. Get invested local help where possible. The days of Albert Schweitzer are just a memory. Today, local nurses and doctors are almost always available, qualified, and interested. Other good reasons to seek local medical involvement include they speak the local languages and dialects. They can better evaluate the patient's needs and challenges. They know what patient questions and obstacles to anticipate. They will be cheerleaders for the programs they are part of and become our friends. They have the best idea of who has the greatest need and how to reach those individuals. They can help by developing a slate of potential patients if our program is going to be a regular event. They help find local solutions to local problems. Find a way for those being helped to participate or contribute. It is important to provide some way to protect a patient's dignity and self-respect. Helping with logistical support or contributing something, anything, to help the next patient goes a long way to accomplishing that. Buy local when possible. Be sure that the project does not compete with the local economy. Long-term medical projects are usually preferable to one-shot or one-week missions. Make sure that participants in missions, foreign or local, are appropriately qualified. Those that we serve must not feel that they are being practiced on or receiving less than our best. Establish coalitions, collaborations, and strong relationships. Partnerships can be amazingly helpful. Consider inviting international societies to assist. Local and national government need to be included where possible. The key here is cooperation with the importing of medical items, the provision of temporary licensing of foreign volunteers, waiving fees and taxes, and so forth. When contemplating a major mission, do some advertising among your home country's significant medical institutions. They may be looking for humanitarian programs to partner with. These relationships can ultimately be as or more important than provider skills or resources at driving the success of a mission.
And now for some thoughts on the power of selflessness, please welcome Richard Louie, anchor and journalist, MSNBC, NBC News.
Hello, and it's good to be here at the 5th International Vatican Conference. Thank you, Dr. Robin Smith, and all the organizers for putting this together, and for inviting me to discuss a topic that is very important to me as of late. It is one that I personally have had to try to figure out as I've lived through caregiving of my father. About 8 years ago, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and then began the decision for me here in New York to whether or not to travel to California to help care for him as Alzheimer's took that long journey of taking him away from us. And I decided to ask my supervisor if I could work less, then began a part-time profession as a news anchor here at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. I worked from 8 days a week, as we like to say in the business, down to 3 days on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And this is so that I could go to California and take the 10-hour trip 2 or 3 times a month. And that began sort of a long exploration of why I was making such a decision. And I'm certainly far from being perfect in the idea of selflessness, as many will attest, but I began to think about it. And that's what led me to today and a book called Enough About Me. As a journalist, I like to explore what I don't understand so well. But what I did understand, unfortunately, well, was selfishness. And I believe that what we're living through today is a selfish pandemic. And what tells me we're living through a selfish pandemic has been the stories I've had to cover, whether it's racial strife. There are the numerous mass killings that I've stayed up all night in this very building at 30 Rockefeller Plaza of killers taking lives, the epitome of being selfish, thinking that because of my view, I have the right to take other people's lives. All of that together, along with the viral pandemic, where there are individuals who we saw very readily not wearing masks around people that were very susceptible to this horrible pandemic, like my parents. Now, these are all things we know, but the idea that we're living in a selfish pandemic and my journey caring for my father brought me into this idea. I needed to explore this idea of selflessness. And one of the amazing things is that this is very accessible in bite-sized ways, and that it's not the gargantuan idea of being Mother Teresa or Desmond Tutu, and that we can be selfless by looking at the decisions we make every 15 minutes. In the process of digging into selflessness, found that scientists more or less agree that we make a conscious choice about every 15 minutes. And that when we go buy a lunch then, or we reach out to somebody for a call, what might we do for that other person that might be selfless? Do we buy them a lunch? Do we buy somebody else a lunch? Do we donate a lunch? Do we call people that we don't agree with because we want to figure out maybe there is a happy middle ground? And so with that very accessible way, and the way we can build muscle tone by doing something daily like that, it enforces us, it reinforces us to be able to do the big things when they do come about. And on that note, there's also some very unintended benefits that we found in our research for under selflessness. You can live longer. It was proven up to 4 years, according to a study that looked at 55 plus who were doing volunteer work. Those who were doing it for a selfless notion lived 4 years longer than the average. Those who did that work for a selfish reason lived 2 years less. The research shows we can live longer, we can look better, we can be happier. And when we look at the time of 2021, we do need to, in this collective moment globally, understand how we can help each other in a different way. And so it shows that the unintended benefits of selflessness can actually give us these typical self-help kind of benefits along the way. And I know that, though we live in a selfish pandemic, as I am positing here, that I often see the amazing selfless heroes out there that counterbalance that single selfish person that might be out there doing something horrific. I mentioned the killings, the mass killings, and Tiffany Parada is one example who turns around her car in the street when she's in El Paso, Texas, to drive towards the shooter that just shot at her and her family, to overtake that car so that she can roll down her window and warn other people that there is a shooter that's behind them. Driving at 120 miles an hour she was, and she had her 4 young children in the back seat. Her whole world was in that car. But she and her husband decided they would risk it all to warn others in a selfless way. And there were always the Tiffany Paradas around these selfish epitomes of badness. There are always 10 or 20 others that are doing far more heroic things in a selfless way. And it's real. And so thanks for spending some time with me to consider this need of combating selfishness and what we've seen today. And as a journalist, what I've seen in my reporting. I think with all the great minds here today who bring so many different specialties and thinkings and abilities, that we can combat big things like this. And it is potentially way above my pay grade, but not above yours. So thank you for being here and gathering at the 5th International Vatican Conference. And I'm hoping that some great solutions to big ideas and big problems like this will arise. And I'm very confident that will. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the program.